Story number 1. It was my very first time going to a summer camp, which seemed to be a perfect match because it was the very first year that the camp my parents sent me to opened its doors for business. I wasn't all that enthusiastic about going away to a place I was unfamiliar with for the entire summer though, but I guess my parents needed the break. For weeks leading up to the first day at camp, I mentally prepared myself by studying the online images of the place. It was a really nice looking place with a beautiful crystal clear lake and cabins that looked like they had just been built a month ago. There were also plenty of recreational things to do, things like a rally course where you could race go-karts, 4 basketball courts, and there was even a baseball field. Despite all of the positive things this camp brought to the table, I refused to bite on the whole spending my entire summer there until I could verify the caliber of chicks that would be attending this place. Throwing in some cute faces with well-developed bodies was the only way I'd be sold. The entire ride there I was nervous, the kind of nervous that you would experience on your first day at a new school. But my nerves were quickly calm when I saw the variety of hot girls walking around, ranging from my age to their later teens. After seeing that, I couldn't get rid of my parents quick enough. Once my parents were gone, I began exploring the campgrounds and even began socializing. Everything was going great. I had even picked out the girl I planned on getting cozy with for the rest of the summer, and I'd only been there for a couple of hours. By nightfall, the counselors led us out into the woods where we all gathered around a huge fire and listened to ghost stories. All of the stories that were told were weak, and some were downright laughable, but I was still having the time of my life because I was sitting next to the girl who I had blessed to be my summer crush, and what made the situation even better was that I could kind of tell she was feeling me too. I had been fighting the urge to pee for nearly 20 minutes, but now it was starting to get a little uncomfortable, so I excused myself from the fire to relieve myself. It wasn't much of a big deal. Other kids had been doing it since we came out there. One of the counselors told me not to wander too far, and I almost told her, "Do you really think you needed to tell me that?" What a moron. I mean really, it was pitch black out, we're in the middle of the woods, and this was my first time out here. I may be 13, but I'm not an idiot. Of course I wasn't going to go too far, but what I wasn't going to do was stay close enough where people could see me conducting my business. What if my need to release a number 1 turned into a demand for me to handle a number 2? May sound weird to you, but that's happened to me on several occasions, and I learned the hard way that when that happens, time is of the essence. I went just far enough into the woods so that I couldn't be seen by the others, but stayed close enough so that I could still see the fire. I unzipped and began watering the grass when I heard a crackle behind me. I casually looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. As I turned back around, I was terrified to see the pale face of a young girl staring back at me. I yelled out in fright as I fell backwards and landed flat on the unforgiving ground. I could feel a soothing warmth form around my waist and expand down my left leg. In the shock of the moment, I apparently forgot to turn off my faucet, but that was the least of my concerns now. As I studied the girl under the soft glow of the moonlight, I saw that there was a stream of dry blood that ran from the top of her head, down the side of her face, and onto the left side of her jaw. In a total state of terror, I managed to ask, "Who are you? Are you okay?" She said nothing, just stood there staring at me in an eerie silence. What happened next scared the shit out of me, and I mean that quite literally. The young girl, who had to be around my age or a couple years younger, raised a single finger to her mouth and whispered in a soft voice that somehow echoed in my ears. She said, "Shh, you should go now. The bad man's coming, and he's really angry." Now, up until that point, it had been a relatively warm night, but suddenly, a frigid breeze kicked up from out of nowhere and swept past me, causing goosebumps to cover my entire body and raising the hairs on the back of my neck. From a far off distance in the pitch black woods where the wind seemed to be coming in from, I heard what sounded like a man angrily roaring. From the way his voice was getting louder, it sounded like he was barreling directly towards me. I got up to my feet and made a dash for it, using the light of the campfire as my guide. I was running like a gazelle. That should tell you how scared I was because from the waist down, I felt like a toddler in Pampers that hadn't been changed in 3 days. As I closed the distance between myself and the campfire, I heard myself scream like a little child when another little girl with a bloody face suddenly stepped out from behind a nearby tree, and I screamed again as I saw another who was even bloodier. I was so freaked out that when I finally reached the campfire, I didn't even stop. I blew past all the others and ran straight for the cabins. To hell with it. It was every man for himself as far as I was concerned. I could hear them chattering seconds after I passed them by. Some were worried about what was wrong with me, while others were complaining of the putrid smell that I left in my trail. I ran into the cabin and hid under my assigned bunk. I curled into the fetal position and began crying hysterically and shaking uncontrollably, completely oblivious to the mushy mess inside my soiled pants. I must have looked like a hardcore mental patient to the others. After about an hour or so of this, I was absolutely freezing, but I refused to come out from under my bed until my parents arrived to pick me up later that night. They hosed me down and cleaned me up and loaded me into the car. On our way home, when I felt we put enough distance between us and the campgrounds, I told them what I saw. Naturally, they assumed I had imagined the whole thing, insisting that the campfire ghost stories must have gotten to me. I honestly told them that was bullshit because the damn stories weren't even scary. They kept trying to convince me that what I saw was all in my head, but I refused to accept that. So of course, my mother got in contact with the shrink the very next day and set up an appointment for me. So in the days leading up to my appointment with the nut doctor, I took it upon myself to do a little digging into the campground's history. I typed in the location and found out that while the camp I was at was brand new, it turned out that there was once a popular summer camp there that closed over 40 years ago and was recently torn down a few years ago to make way for the summer camp that stands there now. After doing a little more reading, I found out why the camp suddenly closed, and in that moment, I felt a sense of validation, which was quickly overcome by a sense of dread and horror. It turns out that in 1977, 3 girls, ages 8, 9, and 10, were pulled from their tent and taken out into the woods by an unknown man, who then raped, bludgeoned, and strangled them before disappearing into the night, leaving their dead bodies bound and rolled in their sleeping bags for a camp counselor to discover the next day. While what happened to those poor girls is terrible in itself, what really freaked me out was that it happened on their very first night at camp, June 12th, 1977. My first day of camp was June 12th, 2017. I don't know if that holds any kind of significant meaning, but I do know that there were 3 different girls I saw that night, and all of them had wounds consistent to what I read in the article. And I know without question I heard a man's voice, and whoever he was, he sounded evil and pissed. I know a lot of you probably don't believe me, and that's fine. All I have to say is that if you're going to be camping in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area, you might want to do some research on where you'll be staying. And while you're at it, look up the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. What you find just might have you reconsider camping in the woods this year. But the choice is completely yours. Or, if you're like me, yours and your parents. Speaking of parents, I have to admit, I think my mom was right. Maybe seeing a therapist would be a good idea after all. While I have no intention of ever setting foot on another campground for as long as I live, it'd probably be best if I did seek professional help, just to be on the safe side. Because traumatic shit like this is the kind of stuff that can really warp a young impressionable mind. Story number 2. It was summer vacation and me and my family went on a camping trip to Yosemite. Normally this was the event that motivated me through the entire school year, but that was back when I was a little kid. I was 17 that summer, and I would have much preferred to stay home alone while my parents took my little brother and grandparents on the annual family trip. For most of the trip, I kept to myself, listening to music through my cell phone and earbuds and killing time by texting back and forth with my girlfriend. Of course, I found myself more than a little annoyed whenever I had to stop doing what I was doing to answer random questions from my parents or grandparents. Even my little brother was getting in on the action. My little brother was 7 years old at the time and at that annoying phase where he wanted to follow me everywhere and emulate everything I did. God, that used to get on my nerves. When we finally made it to Yosemite and picked the camping spot, I immediately grew frustrated with the lack of quality cell phone signal. My grandparents were sitting around the campfire my dad had set up with my mother, and when my dad was unpacking some food to cook, my mother asked me if I would keep an eye on my little brother while she gave him a hand. I wasn't in the mood to babysit, but what choice did I have? I told her sure, and she headed into the RV and began helping my dad. My little brother begged me to play a quick game of hide and seek. That was his favorite. And after telling him no 4 times in a row as I tried to obtain a signal, he kept begging. Annoyed with the back and forth, I relented and agreed to play. I told him to go run and hide, and he told me to turn around first. I did, and he took off running. I watched him as he ran behind a tree just at the edge of the forest line. I counted to 20, checking my phone for signal strength the entire time, and once I was done counting, I walked towards where he was hiding. To my surprise, he wasn't behind the tree when I got there. I scanned the immediate area but didn't see any sign of him. I walked around from tree to tree but still didn't see him. I called out, "Okay, Devin, you win. I give up. I can't find you. Come on out." There was seconds of silence, I repeated, "I said you won, Devin. Come on out now." I held my breath as there was nothing but silence, but I eventually breathed a sigh of relief when he emerged from behind a tree in the forest, smiling that 1,000-watt smile of his. I was relieved to see the little pain in the neck, but I was also upset with him for nearly giving me a heart attack. I chased him back to the campsite and we both laughed playfully when I caught him near the tent. After 3 more sessions of hide and seek, lunch was ready. After we ate, my little brother said he had to go to the bathroom and my father asked me to take him. I told him I was tired, but then my mom said either take him to go pee or help my dad clean up while she did. I quickly deduced which would be the easiest task and chose to take my little brother, mostly because I had to take a leak too. Me and Devin headed into a comfortable enough spot in the forest so that we were deep enough for privacy, but not too deep to lose sight of our camping ground. Devin began relieving himself by a tree, and I was about to do the same at a nearby tree when my phone suddenly dinged to life for the first time in hours. I pulled my phone from my back pocket in a hurry and I saw that I received a text message from my girlfriend. It was the first time since we arrived at the park that I had gotten a signal, so I quickly responded to her text before it had a chance to fade. I received another text message seconds later and tried to respond, but the signal was already gone. Disappointed and slightly pissed off, I told my brother to hurry up, it was time to go back to camp. But when I turned my eyes to the tree I last saw him standing by, he was no longer there. I called out to him, but there was no answer, just like before. I figured he was messing with me again, so I pretended that I was going to leave him, thinking that'd provoke his fear enough to make him appear. It didn't. I was nearing the edge of the tree line and Devin still hadn't answered me. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong. I ran back to the area where I just was and searched valiantly for my little brother, frantically calling out his name. After a couple of failed minutes, I ran back to the campsite and told my parents what was going on. It should go without saying that they were panicked right away. My grandparents too. We all headed into the woods and began looking for Devin, and after 10 minutes of pointless searching, it was my granddad who suggested that we get help from a park ranger. Within the next couple of hours, dozens of people were combing the woods looking for my little brother, but there was no sign of him. Eventually, those hours turned into days. My father stayed behind at the park to keep up with the search, while my mother stayed with my worried grandparents back at the campsite. I chose to stay with my father and do my part with aiding in the search. With every step I took, I hoped and prayed that I would discover my brother sitting exhausted but safe behind one of the countless trees. And if not me, at least somebody else would. I didn't necessarily care who found him, just so long as he got found. Unfortunately, Devin would never be found. Strangely, all that would ever be found of my kid brother after weeks of tireless searching were the clothes and shoes he was last wearing, neatly folded and placed on a rock more than 5 miles from our campsite. But there was no signs of him. No one could give my family any type of reasonable explanation on how a kid Devin's age and size could wander so far away over such rough terrain, or why or who left his clothes behind neatly folded by a creek. But what was even stranger about it all was the fact that the area where his clothes were found had been thoroughly searched the day after he went missing, and at that time, nothing was there. It's been years since Devin went missing, and during that time, we haven't gotten any closer to knowing what happened to him or if he's even still alive. We hold off on hope that one day he'll emerge from the thick forest and be reunited with us, but as time continues to pass, the strength of that hope gets weaker and weaker. With all of the uncertainty lingering over me and my family, the one thing I'm sure about is that my little brother's disappearance has dramatically altered all of our lives. We're not the same happy family we once were. There's no more laughing or family picnics, no more family outings or get-togethers. The sun doesn't shine on our home the way it used to, and until Devin returns to us, I don't think it ever will again. Before all of this happened, all I used to want was time to myself so I could do the things that I thought were important to me. That's all changed now. All I really want now is for my brother to come back home safely. But as weeks turned into months and months turned into years, my ultimate fear is that that'll never happen. Especially after hearing writer David Paulides speak in depth about all the people who've gone missing from national parks all across the country for the past 60 years, never to be seen or heard from again. What's weird is a lot of their cases are eerily similar to Devin's. I hate myself for choosing to pay more attention to my cell phone than my kid brother. Maybe he'd still be here with us now had I not turned my back on him that day. I just wish I could tell him how sorry I am for not being the best big brother I could be and for not being there when he needed me to be. Not a day goes by that I don't think about you, and no matter how much time passes, I continue to miss you and your 1,000-watt smile like this terrible tragedy just happened yesterday. I know it probably doesn't mean anything now, But I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I love you, Devin. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you that while you were still here.